Imagine signing a legally binding fire safety contract while you literally watch the other party actively throw lit matches into the neighboring room.
Right. It just makes no sense.
Really doesn't. Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief, available at claireandhoratio.com. Today is Thursday, June 18th, 2026, and we are dropping you straight into the center of a major geopolitical fracture.
Yeah, that newly drafted U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal.
Exactly. It was signed electronically on Wednesday, and the stated goal here is a 60-day window to negotiate a lasting nuclear pact and, force the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
And on paper, Iran has agreed to downblend its highly enriched uranium.
Under the direct supervision of the IAEA, right?
Yes, the International Atomic Energy Agency. And in exchange for that, the text outlines a plan with regional partners to secure at least $300 billion for Iran's reconstruction.
Which sounds like a diplomatic win until you look at the mechanics and, the immense institutional friction it's causing.
Oh, absolutely, because downblending uranium is essentially taking weapons-grade material and diluting it back to civilian grade.
Like taking pure grain alcohol and watering it down into a light beer.
That's a great way to put it. It removes the immediate explosive threat. But the actual friction, it's coming from the financial side. That $300 billion reconstruction clause, it is generating severe blowback within the U.S. Republican Party.
Even though the text specifies the funds are coming from regional partners, not U.S. taxpayers.
Right, but the Manjay base views this as a direct violation of the Trump fans' campaign promise, the promise to end forever wars and explicitly avoid enriching Tehran.
Yeah, the political optics of facilitating a massive cash infusion to Iran, regardless of the source, it just contradicts the core tenets of an America First platform.
Lawmakers are already demanding immediate briefings. They're framing this not as a victory, but as a dangerous concession.
Rewarding Iran for holding global shipping hostage in the Strait of Hormuz. And, the skepticism really deepens when you look at the physical reality on the ground.
It makes those signatures in Geneva look completely detached.
Completely. Because on Wednesday, Israel launched fresh drone and jet strikes on southern Lebanon, severely injuring people in the towns of Mansouri and Azia.
The human cost of this broader conflict is just staggering. Over 300 people killed in Lebanon alone.
And what makes Wednesday's airstrikes particularly notable is the timing, right?
Yeah, they proceeded in direct defiance of President Donald Trump's public warnings at the G7 earlier this week. He explicitly stated Israel needs to be, quote, more responsible.
He criticized the length and the human toll of their campaign against Hezbollah.
But Israel maintains its forces will remain in Lebanon as long as necessary to secure its northern border, while conversely, Hezbollah leadership claims the U.S.-Iran deal covers Lebanon and they're demanding a full withdrawal of Israeli troops.
So you have three different actors operating on three entirely different sets of facts.
Exactly.
The U.S. thinks it bought a 60-day window of peace, Hezbollah thinks the deal forces Israel out, and Israel is demonstrating with fighter jets that it considers itself unbound by a Geneva memorandum it didn't sign.
The structural integrity of the agreement is compromised on day one, and that forces a reevaluation of how much leverage Washington actually holds over its allies right now.
Right.
When a sitting U.S. president issues a public warning at the G7 to scale back military operations, and the allied nation immediately launches fresh drone strikes, it signals a permanent shift in the global power hierarchy.
Regional powers are basically calculating that they can absorb the diplomatic scolding from Washington.
As long as they achieve their immediate tactical objectives on the ground.
Right. And that weaponization of finance and shifting of global power dynamics is playing out with even greater intensity in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, a massive escalation this week.
For 4.5 years, the war in Ukraine has been this grueling war of attrition. But Kiev just launched its largest drone attack on Moscow since the full-scale invasion began.
Almost 200 drones targeted the Russian capital.
And they hit the Kompotny oil refinery for the third time in a month. This forced the evacuation of residential high-rise blocks and completely shut down 4 of Moscow's airports.
The Kompotny refinery is critical infrastructure. It supplies roughly 40% of Moscow's petrol.
Wow.
So striking it is a direct attack on the Russian war chest. It's designed to create immediate domestic fuel shortages and degrade military logistics.
But there's a psychological purpose too, right?
A very deliberate one by Volodymyr Zelensky. By bringing the war home to the capital, he is forcing ordinary Russians to confront reality that state media has largely kept out of sight.
Because when air raid alarms are sounding over Moscow, and citizens can literally see the lid of a large oil storage tank blown dozens of meters into the air from their apartment windows.
A domestic narrative shatters. The idea of an isolated, distant, cleanly managed military operation is gone.
You have to consider the psychological shift for a Muscovite who thought they were totally insulated from the conflict. Suddenly it's in their backyard.
But equally unprecedented is how Ukraine is affording to launch hundreds of long-range drones in the first place.
Right, the funding mechanism.
Yeah, in tandem with these strikes, the UK announced a new loan of approximately $1 billion, or about 750 million pounds, to supply Ukraine with more drones and missiles.
The vital detail here is where that money comes from. This loan is funded entirely by the interest generated on frozen Russian central bank assets. They're sitting in Western financial institutions.
It redraws the boundaries of international financial warfare. I mean, Western nations have held roughly $300 billion in Russian central bank assets frozen since the start of the war.
Because legally, confiscating the principal amount outright violates sovereign immunity laws.
And it terrifies global investors. So the West engineered a workaround. They leave the principal frozen, but siphon off the interest that money generates, which is billions of dollars a year, and hand it to Ukraine.
They are actively penalizing a sovereign state by redirecting the natural yield of its own national wealth to arm the nation it invaded.
Exactly. It bypasses the traditional constraints of using allied taxpayer funding, which has become politically toxic in a lot of Western democracies.
But it sets a profound new global precedent. It signals to every other nation, particularly those in the global south or those allied with China, that participating in the Western financial system carries existential risks.
Yeah, if you violate international borders, your sovereign wealth can and will be weaponized against you.
Which is precisely why nations are accelerating efforts to build alternative financial architectures, completely outside the reach of the US dollar or the euro.
When trust in the neutrality of the global banking system evaporates, countries start looking for ways to store wealth that cannot be frozen or redirected by a geopolitical adversary.
Seeing state power leverage the financial system against private Russian wealth in Ukraine is fascinating when you contrast it with what is happening today in the UK.
The exact inverse?
Yeah, private tech wealth actively trying to overpower the state. Today, Thursday, voters in Makerfield are casting ballots in a historic by-election.
The immediate political headline is that this could see Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham return to Parliament,
Potentially challenging Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party. But the deeper, far more consequential institutional story concerns Nigel Farage and his Reform UK party.
Farage has been secretly lobbying the Bank of England to drop its plans for a state-run digital currency.
The one widely known as Bitcoin.
Right. And to understand why a populist politician is so focused on central bank digital plumbing, you have to look at the financial motivations of his backers.
Let's talk about Christopher Harborne.
Yes. Farage's massive financial patron, Harborne owns a significant 12% stake in Tether.
And Tether is a private cryptocurrency, specifically a stablecoin. Let's unpack how a stablecoin actually functions for a second, because the terminology obscures what is really just a digital casino chip.
Yeah, a stablecoin is supposed to be pegged one-to-one with a government-issued currency, like the US dollar.
So you hand them a dollar, they give you a digital token to trade crypto with, and they put your dollar in a vault.
Right, but the profit mechanism for Tether comes from what they do with those dollars in the vault. They don't just let them sit there. They invest them in interest-bearing assets like US Treasury bills.
And because they hold tens of billions of dollars of user funds, the yield on those treasuries is astronomical.
Registered in El Salvador, Tether generates massive profits, reportedly surpassing those of major legacy corporations like Netflix. Harborne's 12% share of those profits is estimated at roughly $1.34 billion a year.
Unbelievable. By the way, for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinoratio.com. So connect Harborne's massive annual payout to the concept of a state-run Bitcoin.
Well, if the Bank of England introduces a fully secure, regulated, state-backed digital currency, it provides a risk-free alternative to private stablecoins.
Why would a consumer trust a private company operating out of Central America when they can use an official digital currency issued directly by their sovereign central bank?
They wouldn't. A successful Bitcoin severely undercuts Tether's market dominance, directly threatening Harborne's billion-dollar profit engine.
Which reveals a substantial civic danger regarding democratic governance. You have private tech billionaires using political proxies to stall sovereign financial regulations.
It allows private entities to actively dictate national monetary policy simply to preserve their own offshore wealth extraction mechanisms.
And consider the glaring irony of this political maneuvering. You have Nigel Farage, a politician who built his entire brand on a populist message of, taking back control for the working class.
Championing national sovereignty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet he is actively lobbying his own nation's central bank to abandon a sovereign project, specifically to protect the monopoly profits of a billionaire crypto donor.
It asks voters to reconcile a public stance of fierce economic nationalism with backroom efforts to shield offshore tech wealth from domestic regulation.
The broader implication is that private financial power has grown so large that it views the state not as a regulator but as a competitor to be neutralized.
And when stablecoins operate with minimal transparency regarding the actual reserves backing their tokens, the systemic risk to the broader economy is significant.
A central bank digital currency brings that technology under the protective umbrella of the state, ensuring stability and accountability.
Delaying that public safeguard for private gain is a massive compromise of public interest.
That theme of corporate profit quietly rewriting the rules to protect its margins at the expense of public stability. It brings us to a massive shift happening in the global labor market right now.
The artificial intelligence gigification of the workforce.
Right. Because the promise of AI, as sold to you and the broader public, was that it would automate the mindless drudgery, freeing humans for higher-level, creative, and secure work.
Instead, AI is being weaponized to systematically dismantle full-time employment.
The mechanism here is so insidious. Look at the buy now, pay later company Klarna.
They recently replaced hundreds of full-time customer service roles with an AI chatbot, citing massive cost savings.
But when customers complained about degraded service and unresolved complex queries, Klarna didn't rehire their full-time staff.
No, instead, they quietly hired gig workers in an Uber-style setup to handle the specific interactions the AI failed to resolve.
It is the ultimate bait and switch. So Klarna replaces its dedicated staff with an AI. The AI inevitably panics when faced with nuance, and they hire desperate contractors to clean up the mess.
All right.
It's like a company firing its janitorial staff, bringing in a fleet of Roombas, watching them smear dirt all over the walls, and then paying a guy pennies on an app to follow the robots around with a mop.
That's exactly it. The AI isn't doing the job better. It's just stealing the job title so the company can hire the human back on a piece rate basis.
And the economic incentive structure driving this shift is clear. AI is functioning as a tool to reclassify workers from protected employees to independent contractors.
Which effectively rolls back generations of hard-won labor protections. Gig workers lack access to employer-sponsored health insurance, paid sick leave.
Workers' compensation for injuries, guaranteed minimum wages.
Exactly. These companies are masking aggressive labor cost-cutting measures as technological innovation, shifting the financial burden and the operational risk entirely onto the individual worker.
And this extraction of security isn't just happening in customer service. It is infiltrating life-or-death professions.
The healthcare sector.
Yeah, major hospital networks are outsourcing trained nurses to gig platforms like ShiftMed. Highly specialized nurses are forced to bid on individual shifts through an app,
Which often results in lower hourly wages and, shockingly, the requirement for these gig nurses to supply their own basic medical equipment.
The moral hazard of gigifying healthcare is staggering. At least 17 U.S. states have already passed legislation recognizing apps like ShiftMed as healthcare worker platforms rather than traditional medical staffing agencies.
And that legal distinction is crucial, because it completely exempts the platforms from the stringent regulations designed to protect healthcare workers and ensure consistent standards of patient care.
You are looking at the destabilization of core societal roles. When a nurse is treated like a rideshare driver, competing for a Tuesday afternoon shift on a smartphone, without the institutional backing, training, or team cohesion of a hospital employer.
The quality of care inevitably degrades. When institutions optimize purely for labor flexibility and cost reduction, the intrinsic value of institutional knowledge is just destroyed.
It creates a precarious environment where the primary focus of the professional shifts from long-term patient outcomes to securing the next micro-contract just to pay rent.
The integration of AI and algorithmic management in this manner is not elevating the human worker. It is actively commodifying them into interchangeable, unprotected units of labor.
And You know, the breakdown of institutional trust in healthcare is dangerous enough when it's driven by algorithmic labor apps. But when that breakdown of trust occurs during the outbreak of a lethal pathogen, the consequences are immediate and devastating.
Which turns us finally to the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Armed men recently stormed the Wanamahika Hospital in the city of Butembo. They abducted a 6-year-old Ebola patient and her mother directly from an isolation tent.
The context of this abduction is critical. The region is currently battling a sudden surge of the rare Bundibugyo strain of the Ebola virus.
And unlike other strains, there is currently no approved vaccine for Bundibugyo.
Right. Public health officials, including the head of Africa's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, are warning that without immediate and rigorous containment, this specific outbreak could scale to become worse than the catastrophic 2014 West Africa crisis,
Which killed over 11,000 people. You have to ask a deeply uncomfortable question here. Why would armed groups, or sometimes even crowds of local citizens, attack the very clinics and medical personnel providing their only defense against a fatal virus?
It points to a profound failure of communication and a deeply rooted suspicion of authority that just overrides basic self-preservation.
A toxic combination of regional insecurity, intensive local mining activity, and profound misinformation is fueling this hostility.
In remote areas of the DRC, the nature of Ebola is deeply misunderstood. A significant and vocal segment of the population actually believes the virus is a deliberate invention.
They view it as a hoax, fabricated by foreign NGOs and corrupt local hospitals, designed specifically to extract international relief funding.
And when citizens fundamentally believe that emergency health interventions are merely profit-driven schemes executed by outsiders, the entire public health apparatus collapses.
Because the abducted 6-year-old child and her mother are highly infectious. By pulling them out of isolation, the armed group is risking their own lives, the lives of the child's relatives, and ensuring the virus spreads untracked through a highly vulnerable population.
The situation in the DRC vividly demonstrates that medical infrastructure and scientific knowledge alone cannot contain an outbreak.
Right, successful containment relies entirely on contact tracing.
And contact tracing is like trying to map out a massive family tree in real time during a forest fire. If you miss a single branch, the fire continues to spread.
You simply cannot draw that map if the population is actively hiding patients and burning your clinics. The officials attempting to trace the contacts of infected individuals are paralyzed because they are forced to operate in an environment of active, lethal hostility.
We are seeing a common thread across every story today.
A stark picture of what happens when the structures designed to govern and protect us lose their grip. From the signatures in Geneva completely failing to stop airstrikes on civilians in Lebanon, to Western nations rewriting the financial rules of war with frozen Russian assets.
We see a UK populace using his political weight to protect an offshore crypto billionaire from a sovereign central bank.
We see AI being used not to elevate workers, but to strip nurses and writers of their basic labor rights through gig apps. And in the Congo, we see misinformation completely paralyzing the defense against a lethal pathogen.
The underlying reality is that private interests, technological acceleration, and local mistrust are rapidly outpacing the ability of traditional institutions to regulate them or maintain order.
Whether it's a tech platform claiming it's merely a software provider to avoid labor laws, or an armed group rejecting medical science out of deep-seated suspicion, the authority of the state and the institution is fracturing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining the conversation today. We invite you to visit clarineratio.com for more daily world briefs, debate candy, and classic audiobooks. As you look at the systems governing your own life, from the healthcare you rely on to the money in your bank account, ask yourself, if AI labor loopholes and private wealth can bypass traditional state regulations this easily, what happens to the concept of citizenship in a decade? Will your basic protections and security come from your passport, or will you have to buy them through a subscription tier?